bit of a mishmash. There's a little bit of social media talk, a little bit of photo talk, and a little bit of Lightroom talk. So hopefully things will kind of fit together pretty smoothly and we can kind of get through all of that. Just to start, I wanted to share a little bit about me. Got to make myself memorable. I live in San Francisco. I am mom to these two wonderful, wonderful dogs. I also have a little bit of an obsession with dogs and taking selfies with dogs. So this is how I feel like I see myself all the time, but this is how the rest of the world usually sees me. I'm a photographer. I've been a photographer for about 17 years, and I have a lot that I could share with you, but only about an hour and 15 minutes to do it, so I'll go ahead and get started. For today's class, we have a couple of objectives. We are going to talk a little bit about visual content and why that's important. We're going to talk about some photography basics. We're going to talk about Lightroom CC for mobile, and I'll go over how to capture within the app, as well as how to edit and share from the app. Many of you are probably familiar with this saying. If you're not already, it's from, I believe Bill Gates said it in 1996. And really what it references is the fact that what people are coming to you and your platforms and your channels for is the content that you share. So you can spice it up with all sorts of different things, but really when it comes down to it, the most important thing is the actual content that you're sharing. Any marketer will tell you that that is absolutely true. People can see through things that aren't genuine, that haven't been done well, and haven't really been well thought out. So given the fact that all of social media is essentially content, how do you make your content stand out? If we just look at the sheer numbers, the number of monthly active users in millions on all of these, some of the major platforms, there are 336 million people using Twitter on a monthly basis, 1 billion using Instagram, 1.9 billion on YouTube, and 2.23 billion on Facebook. So with so many people on social media, there's a ton of content being shared out there. So in that situation, the signal to noise ratio is actually very low. There's a lot of noise and not a lot of really relevant, important stuff that needs to be, to make it through that noise. So one of the ways that you can kind of cut through that noise to make your content stand out is to use visuals. I know that I don't really have to convince anybody in this room that visual content is really important, especially when it comes to social media. Just a few things about it, of course. It's very eye-catching if people are just scrolling through your feed or scrolling through their feeds. Having a really great visual is going to make them stop and pay attention to what it is that you're sharing. Because it eliminates the need for words, what it does also is that it breaks through language barriers. So given the fact that the internet is global, we're not all speaking the same language, what it helps to do is communicate with those who don't speak the same language. When people are looking at images, there's a much faster processing time than if they were to actually read the content that you're sharing. And the retention rates are much higher. If it's text only, it's shown that the retention rate is roughly 10%. When you include visuals, it increases to 60%. That's a pretty huge, striking difference. And then last but not least, we all want this, right? On our own personal channels, if we're sharing on work channels, we want there to be a lot of engagement on the content that we're sharing. And one of the ways to really increase that engagement is by sharing visual content. Visual content has 40 times more engagement across all channels, all platforms, than content that's just text only. Now, when I talk about visual content, I'm talking about all of these different things. Really, and more. There was kind of no way to list them all. But what I'm going to be talking about specifically today is photography. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm really going to be focused on Lightroom CC for mobile. And mobile is especially important because mobile is such a huge part of sharing on social media. Not all of us have big fancy cameras, but all of us have smartphones all of the smartphones have cameras that can take pretty incredible photos. They just get better and better and better. I want you guys to be able to walk out of this room feeling confident and able to capture using your phones and feeling good about what you can then share from social media from there. When you're thinking about what content you're sharing on your different platforms, I really encourage you to think about your platforms as different channels. So just like a traditional TV network, different channels are broadcasting different things, and you tune into different channels for different reasons. So along those same lines, I want you to think of using your social media in that same way. So you may decide that one platform is more for informing your clients and consumers, one is more for entertaining, one's for connecting, having conversations with the rest of the industry. Whatever it is you decide, think about it being different on the different platforms, because what you don't want is to mimic exactly what's on one network or one platform across all of them. Because what that's going to do is make it so that I, as a consumer, have no reason to follow all of your different channels. If it's all mimicked content, then it's all gonna, there's no reason to follow you on more than one. Sorry, this is suddenly got very loud. Yeah, so if you guys can't hear me on the ends, feel free to come in a little closer. All right, so a lot of people you've probably seen will do things like share a photo on Instagram and then cross-post it. Goes to Twitter at the same time, goes to Facebook at the same time, and it's identical content on all the channels. So when I see people like that, I encounter, since I'm in the photography world, I encounter a lot of photographers, and when I meet them, I try to connect with them on all the channels so that I can follow their work. But what I'm not going to do is follow them on Twitter as well as Instagram when Twitter is literally an exact duplicate of Instagram. So kind of popped into these, sorry. So like I said, different channels have different purposes, and the different purposes therefore will result in different content that is being shared. So that could be you're sharing single versus multiple images, edited versus unedited images. So everything that I share on Instagram, for example, has been edited. I want it to look as nice as possible. But when I come to a conference event like this, I'm just taking quick photos. I'm at Adobe Sneaks and I want to just capture a photo and share it out to Twitter. That stuff's not edited. That's just like get it out there fast, because it's more timely than Instagram and has a much different purpose than Instagram, which is more like my portfolio. Other types of content you can explore, obviously boomerangs, videos, all sorts of other things. And I want to give you an example of how I, as an individual photographer, this is very specific to me since I'm a photographer, how I use my different channels. For Instagram, I'm primarily sharing the polished, completed, artistic imagery that I love and I would be proud to put in my portfolio. On my Instagram stories, I'm sharing content that's more like the behind the scenes if I'm doing a shoot, for example, or the events of a day or an event, or what is the other thing? A place. I recently went to this museum reopening outside of DC. I went to this wonderful museum called the Glenstone Museum. They had been closed for an expansion for about three to 5 years. And they reopened, they invited me, and so what I did was I attended and I made these nice little short videos just kind of giving people a tour of the new space and encouraging them to visit the museum. That's a really wonderful way to use something like Instagram stories, because I'm not going to take a photo necessarily. Actually, I ended up sharing a lot of photos from that day, but normally I might do 10 or 15 photos and videos in my Instagram story and one single final image that goes on. So Instagram stories is a really nice way for me to share additional content that wouldn't necessarily make it on my feed, but sort of enhances the content that I do share. For Twitter, I typically share B-roll images, things like photos from conferences. That's not going to make it onto my Instagram feed, but I want to share it out there. I want to be a part of the conversation. Maybe it's something funny that I encountered or experienced. I want to share that. On Facebook, for me personally, in terms of my own personal Facebook account, I have a business account. I don't really use it. But my selfies and photos with friends and the casual, like cool, fun photos that are relevant for me and my life and my family and my friends, but maybe not for my greater audience, that all goes on Facebook because that's more private. So what might that look like for a small business? So what you share on your platforms as a business will be dictated by how you've decided how you're using those platforms and how you're really differentiating the content and the message across your platforms. So, for example, these are just kind of examples and ideas. An Instagram feed could be more your curated marketing images and potentially user-generated content. So user-generated content is really, really wonderful, especially for small businesses who might not always be able to generate the content that they need to keep their social media accounts busy and active and constantly producing new stuff. So tapping into what the users, your clients, your consumers, your followers are creating can be really beneficial for you on your networks. So that's where you see a lot of, post with our hashtag to be featured on our account, those kinds of requests, because what that means is that if I share that, if I'm a small business and I'm like, hey, tag me in your post, hashtag my hashtag, and then, I'll pick my favorite one and reshare that on my platform. I'm tapping into all of you guys right now for potential content that I don't have to create. There's also, people do a lot of contests and stuff like that. That's how they get some of that user-generated content to share as well. Again, Instagram stories. Behind-the-scenes stuff is really great for Instagram stories. Showing how your jewelry is made if you're a jeweler, or showing company culture if you have employees and like a fun workplace. Sharing your business news and also resharing customer content. Now that Instagram Stories has that reshare to your own story feature, if you've been tagged in an IG story, you can reshare it on your own channel. That's really helpful for businesses as well. You've probably seen people do that. On Twitter, Twitter's much more industry relevant, much more for conversations and sharing links and things that are harder to share out on Instagram. On Instagram, I'm sure you're familiar with, it's pretty much standard protocol, very accepted and understood behavior for somebody or a business to post, I have this new blog post or promoting this new thing or check out this new photo essay that I did. The link is in my bio. Right? I'm sure everybody has seen that. The link is in my bio because we can't share links within the Instagram captions. It's totally fine and acceptable and understood that you're sharing the link in your bio. But on Twitter, it happens right there in the tweet. So when links are of the utmost importance and you're sharing a bunch of different links, Twitter is definitely the outlet for that versus Instagram. And Facebook, the difference with Facebook is that it's really a wonderful place to not only share out the events because there's a built-in event page that you can share to your followers. It's really great. It's probably the best space of the ones I listed for longer form content. So those of us who don't have blogs but want to share something that's a little bit more significant than 280 characters in a tweet, and Instagram is not really a reading platform. So if you want to share more content, longer form content, do it on Facebook. And remember that you can always cross-share links and whatnot. So what I mean by that is that say that you have this incredible blog post with all this information that you want to share. You came to Adobe Max, you learned all this stuff, you want to share it out to the people who follow you, you make your blog post. And then what you can do is share a photo from Adobe Max on Instagram. Say, hey, I just, for those of you interested in what I learned at Adobe Max, follow the link in my bio. And then you can give people maybe a sneak peek of it. I learned how to do this trick, share that on Twitter. If you want to learn more, follow this link, and you direct them to your your website or your blog. So it's still promoting the same blog post, but you're sharing about it in different ways using different content. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about taking high quality images. These are things that you can actually do before you even pick up your camera. And I know that they might seem silly, but they will probably change your life. I think one of them, at least one of them will. So if you don't take away anything else from me today, remember these 3 things. So the first one is clean your lens. I know it sounds really silly and straightforward and, well, duh, of course, we're making sure our lens is clean. But when it comes to smartphones especially, the lenses get very dirty and very quickly, and you don't even realize it. So I often have people coming up to me and they say, my phone doesn't take photos that are as good as your phone. And inevitably, I pick up their phone and I look at their lens and there's gunk on the back of it. So my phone is constantly in my back pocket. I pull it out, put my fingers right on the lens, leave fingerprints all over it. When I'm eating, it's often turned upside down on the table next to me, so whatever I'm eating might splash onto it. I mean, you get some really gross stuff on it. My dogs lick it. So every time before I take a photo, I just use my shirt. It's fine. Do it gently, breathe on it to fog it up if you really need to. You will notice a tremendous improvement in your photos if you do that. Just capturing these like light flares and haze and kind of cloudiness, that all comes from the fact that the back of your lens is dirty. So that's the first step that I really highly recommend to everybody. And especially if you're wanting to take a selfie like I do with all my dogs, if you want to take a selfie, clean the front-facing camera lens as well. That's the side that's against our face when we make phone calls, so it is always dirty and smudgy. So every time before I take a selfie, I just take my shirt, wipe it really quickly, and then I take it. Things will be much improved if you remember to do that. The next tip is that I encourage you all to really avoid digital zoom if at all possible. So a lot of our smartphone cameras now have 2 lenses. The iPhone has the wide and the telephoto lens. And the way that it works inside the camera is that when you're taking a photo, there's a little 1x, 2x button at the bottom. So if you tap it, it toggles between 1x and 2x. So you're toggling back and forth between your wide and your telephoto lens. Those are the 2 optical lens focal lengths. So that's your optical zoom. That's going to yield the highest quality final images. Once you're going in between those, 1x and 2x, or beyond that, that turns into a digital zoom. And that kind of is sort of reminiscent of all the talk that we heard years back about, when you go to buy a consumer level point and shoot camera, like my mom does this. She goes and she's like, oh, it has 5 times optical zoom, but 100 times digital zoom, which sounds awesome, but it's really just taking those same pixels and stretching them out and faking a zoom, basically. So the more you zoom in digitally, the more image degradation that you're going to get. So you cannot stand here and take a photo of the room and then just crop it to have like a portrait of a single person. That's not going to be the best quality image. So if you want the best quality image, get as close as you can. Remember, you can just walk closer to your subject most of the time in order to really maintain that highest quality. The last thing is to really pay attention to the light. And I have this whole section coming up on light, but it's something that I encourage you all to think about before you even go to take your photo. So if this is for your own personal use, you're taking photos for your own social media or for your own interests, it's something to consider. But if you work for a company, say you're in charge of social media for your business, and somebody says to you, here's this product, I want you to take a photo of it so we can share it on Instagram. I want you to think about the lighting, and I'll give you some tips about that, before you even take that photo. If somebody says, here, take a photo of this person so we can share it on our social media, think about the light before you even take the photo. Photography literally means drawing with light. So without light, photography would not exist, which means that the first step to improving your images is to really see, understand, and use light to your advantage. When in doubt, more is better. So that is just one basic way of thinking about it. Of course, capturing in a room like this is going to give you some really, this room is not the best lighting situation. It's fine for our purposes, but in terms of taking a nice photo, it's not going to give you what you want. Our cameras, one of the reasons why the big fancy cameras cost a lot more than the consumer cameras is because the sensors are bigger. And the bigger the sensors, the better they handle low light situations. So what you'll see, especially on smartphones, the sensor on a smartphone is quite small compared to a DSLR. So what you'll see is that when you're capturing in low light situations, the noise level, the digital noise you see in the image, that's that gritty graininess, especially when you zoom in, you'll see a lot more of that when you're capturing an image in low light. So if at all possible, if you have the choice, opt to capture something where there's more light. Even going out into the lobby over there would give you much better results. If you meet up with a friend, you want to take a selfie, or you want to take a photo for social media for work, don't do it in this space where it's dark. Just go out to the lobby where it's brighter. Just simple decisions like that can improve the resulting photos significantly. In general, I recommend opting for natural light. What will happen when you are dealing with a mixed lighting situation like this is that you have competing color temperatures. So what you see in this image, on the top left, there's an artificial light, and on the right, there's natural light coming in from the window. So the artificial light has very yellow, warm tones, and the natural light has cool blue tones. And generally, when you're capturing in one specific lighting scenario, your camera adjusts the white balance to compensate. So if it's just the yellow artificial light, it compensates by cooling things down to bringing it, to make it more of a neutral color. But when it's mixed like this, it can't compensate with more blue because it's going to make the blue part bluer. It can't compensate with more yellow to cool down or to warm up that, make the yellow yellower. So you end up having this kind of gross mixed yellow-blue color. Whereas if you had just turned the natural light off, yes, you're sort of relying on the camera to, usually it's going to shoot at a higher ISO, which means a little bit more noise, but there's plenty of light in this scenario that when I just turned off that artificial light, there was enough light for me to still capture the image. And it's a much more pleasant image. It's a little bit hard to see side by side like this, but it's a much more pleasant image. You've eliminated not only the color temperature differences, but that like bright yellow flare on the top left as well. So in terms of natural versus artificial light, what I do want to say also is that generally this is something that you as the photographer can take control of. So it could be going so far as to ask the coffee shop or the restaurant or wherever you are if you can turn the lights off for a second just so you can take your photo. There are situations where that's doable, situations where it's not doable, I totally understand. But especially if you're in your own home, your own studio, you're capturing in your workplace, go in a room, turn the light off. You'll find that your results are going to be much, much better. The time of day matters when you're talking about natural light especially. That can completely change the look and the feel of the photo. So I have two photos here taken in the same place during different times of the day. Both I think are nice, but the feel is much, much different. This photo kind of makes me want to jump into those waters and, especially those that really bright blue of the ocean back there. It looks wonderful. And this is more, I wouldn't mind jumping into those waters either, but it's very much like a chill, relaxing, have a drink by the side of the pool feel. This is different. Again, two images that were captured. These two were actually captured not too far apart from one another. So right at sunrise, and then probably 30 minutes after sunrise. So if you, especially if you're not a photographer, photographers understand, but if you're not a photographer, like my husband, sometimes he doesn't understand why I'm like, no, we go now. Like I need to go and get there now because the light could go from this to this in mere minutes, right? So that timing is really crucial and can change everything. Pay attention to light and shadow. You'll see a lot of really interesting things when you start looking for light and shadow wherever you go. You'll find really wonderful patterns, get really lovely moments like this, and even stumble upon epic scenes like this. Allow the light to dictate your subject placement. So I was just walking around town with my friend and saw that the light was reflecting really beautifully off of a window nearby and creating this kind of spotlight. And I decided I wanted to photograph her there, and it ended up being this really perfect place for it, but I wouldn't have noticed it. I wouldn't have stopped for that wall alone. What made me stop was the light, and it ended up working out really well. The same goes for days when there isn't really obvious, strong light. It's not a bright, sunny day. There is directionality. There's generally always directionality in light, even on a cloudy day, kind of like this was. And I want to share with you this trick that I use. I use it a lot when I'm taking people for photo walks and stuff like that. It looks maybe a little silly, but it's actually kind of helpful, especially in a lower lighting situation where it's not as obvious where your light source is. On a really cloudy day, the sun is still out there. So using this trick can kind of help you figure out how to light the person. Generally, when you're taking a photo of an object or a subject, you want the light to be behind you, casting light onto the subject. Not always, right? For artistic reasons, you might want to change it up, but in general, it's best to have your light on the subject instead of behind it. So if you're walking around and you're not sure where that light source is, I recommend doing this, holding your palm up and pretending like your palm is the face of your subject. So instead of moving a person around and spinning them around to see where the light is good, you are spinning yourself and your hand, and you're seeing what the light looks like as it falls on your palm. So what you'll notice is that here the light is very flat on my hand. That's like super direct light. You'll see that as I turn it, I start to get a little bit of shadowing, right? Like if it was a person's face, their nose would be casting a shadow across their cheek, that sort of thing. This is really bad. Direct side light might not be good for what you want. If you go further, then it's like backlit. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't. But it'll help you determine where you should place your person so that the light is optimal on their face. So if you guys just try that when you're out and about, it can be really helpful. Just think about it. All right. So one of the reasons why you want that light source to be in front of the person is because capturing catch lights in your subject's eyes is incredibly important. So catch lights, for those who don't know, are the reflections in your subject's eyes of the light source. So this was taken inside, so my light source was the window, which means that I really wanted my subject facing the window, so I was sort of backed up against the window taking this photo because I wanted that light in her eyes. So I have a couple examples, side-by-side comparisons of a photo. They're all good photos. There's nothing that makes it a bad photo. If you don't have catch lights, it doesn't mean it's a bad photo. But what you'll see is that having that added catch light adds a little bit of light and sparkle to the person's eyes that just isn't present when you don't have the catch lights. Next example. What you're sometimes faced with, I'm often faced with this as a photographer, is that I have a subject and I am trying to decide if I want to shoot them in the optimal light with wonderful catch lights, or if I want to shoot them in front of the optimal background. And they don't always go together. So the photo of the girl in the spotlight against the brick wall, that was pretty good. That brick wall was actually kind of nice. It wasn't so bad. The photo on the left is backlit. So the sun is behind my subject. I knew that, and I knew that I wasn't going to catch the catchlights in her eyes when I posed her that way. And the reason I did it is because there was a bathroom behind us. And I didn't want the bathroom as my background, so I made that decision to lose my catchlights in favor of a nicer background. All right, let's go into Lightroom CC for mobile. I want to talk a little bit about why Lightroom CC. Over the years, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I've been shooting on my iPhone since 2010, which is when Instagram came out. I shoot film and DSLR and all sorts of stuff and have been doing that for a long time. But I've been a mobile photographer since 2010. And over the years, I've captured on many different third-party apps. I've edited in even more third-party apps, just trying to get the specific look or feel or effect that I want. And I do honestly have to say that for me, Lightroom CC for mobile is kind of like the one app to rule them all. I don't work for Adobe, they didn't tell me to say that, but it is honestly true. In all my years doing this, it's been really difficult to find an app that can do as much as the Lightroom CC mobile app does. It enables you to not only capture your images and have control over the capture, but you can review the images as well, edit them, and then share easily to social media. And we'll talk about that kind of really quickly throughout the rest of the session. It provides you with a very cohesive workflow so that you can do a lot, basically everything that you need to do, you can do within the same single app and the same ecosystem. You can do a quick share to social media. And the best thing is that if you are a subscribing cloud member, you can sync across your devices. So everything stays in the Lightroom ecosystem, but you can make an edit on your phone that then shows up on your iPad and on Lightroom CC on your computer, as well as Lightroom Web. So that's incredibly powerful. Given our lives today and how, especially me, I travel so much for work, having that mobile workflow is incredibly important to me. How many of you guys are using Lightroom Classic? Anybody? Classic? Okay. Anybody who's using CC but not Classic? How many of you guys aren't sure? Okay, everybody knows. Okay, cool. I taught this class, or similar class, a year ago when Lightroom CC was just announced, and it took a lot of explaining to know the differences between Classic and CC. But for those of you who are a little bit unfamiliar with the setup, if you're kind of new to this photo thing, Lightroom Classic is the traditional Lightroom that has been around for years. It's essentially a program that ties us to our home computer, whether it be a laptop or a desktop. Your files are stored locally, so they're either on your machine itself or on an attached external hard drive. Lightroom CC was announced last year. It's more for mobile workflow. So like I said, very easy syncing across devices. And instead of storing your original files locally, you're storing them up in the cloud, which means that you can put all your original RAW files in the cloud and access them no matter where in the world you are, as long as you have your Adobe login. So even if I was to lose my phone and my laptop and my iPad, I could travel to New York or wherever across the world and just log into Adobe online and still access those original RAW files, which is incredibly powerful. Oh, sorry. Okay, let's talk about capturing in Lightroom CC. So those of you who are familiar with photography are also familiar with the JPEG versus RAW debate. I don't know if it's so much a debate anymore as hard drives get bigger and there's more storage easily available. But essentially, you can capture in different file formats. And the raw file format is like your digital negative, so it has a lot more data than a JPEG file does, because a JPEG file has kind of distilled out some of the, it's pulled out what it thinks are the most important based on what you've told it, and discarded the external information. So what that really means is that because there's so much more data in a raw file, there's much more latitude when it comes to editing. So you can pull it a lot brighter, pull it a lot darker before losing the details. Most camera companies, Canon, Nikon, Sony, they have their own proprietary raw format. DNG is Adobe's answer to that, non-proprietary raw format that's a much more compressed version, so it has that same amount of data but takes up less space. So when you're taking your photos within Lightroom CC, you can actually specify whether or not you want to capture as a JPEG or as a DNG. And that's something that a lot of photographers have been asking for a while, because we've been taking photos on our phones for years, but we have not been able, either have not been able to capture RAW, or the iPhone now enables it, but you have to use a third-party app like Lightroom to access that feature. So thankfully, it's built right into Lightroom for us if we're already in that ecosystem. I want to show you guys how to turn on the tech previews if you haven't already yet, and explain to you really what they are in case you don't know. Everything that you capture lives within the Lightroom ecosystem. So you're taking it and it's automatically backing up and syncing with the cloud if you're a subscriber. And then what that means is that without doing anything else, you can pop over to your desktop computer and have all of those images that you captured on your phone right there as well. The backup's nice as well, not just the syncing, but actually having them in the cloud in case you do something like take photos and then lose your phone. Given all that it does, there are still a few things that it's missing in the capture that I'm still going to third-party apps or the native camera app on my phone to capture. One of those is bursts. There's also time lapses, boomerangs, panoramas, and videos, of course. I feel like some of those things might come in, like burst, but probably not all of them. So just be aware that it is incredibly powerful, but there are still reasons you might want to use other apps. All right, I'm going to pop over to my phone and do a demo. Okay. So before I forget, what I want to mention is that how this is my lock screen, and I shoot on an iPhone. If I want to access my camera quickly, all I have to do on this particular model of phone is hard press on that camera to get to my native camera. The quick launch from the lock screen is incredibly powerful. I encourage you to set it up. I think all Androids have it, but you might have to set it up sometimes on some of them. So I encourage you to make sure you can quick launch your camera from the lock screen. And the reason I mention this is because capturing in Lightroom means that you can no longer use this, right? I mean, you have to use the Lightroom launch. But what I want to point out is that for iOS, if you do the swipe to the right, you can basically add the Lightroom widget. I don't know the specifics of how to do that on Androids because everyone is different, but there should be a way to do a quick launch widget as well. So I encourage you to look for it so that all you have to do is from the lock screen, press the icon that takes you right into the camera. Okay, so a couple things in here that I want to share. I want to make sure you guys know how to turn on those tech previews. So I'm actually going to back out of here by hitting the X on the top left and going to, let's see, okay, the dots, 3 dots on the top right give me my settings at the bottom. And all the way at the bottom it says technology previews. And that's where I can toggle those switches to turn on the technology previews. I do have to say that I believe the depth preview is only available for cameras, for smartphones that have 2 lenses, like a wide and a telephoto. So like the 10 series of iPhones and the pluses and whatever other Androids have that. And it honestly might, I'm not entirely clear if it's even available on Android just yet. But I know it works for iOS. when you have the two lenses to have that depth preview. But they should all have the long exposure preview. So if you turn those on, when you pop back to your camera, on the bottom left, you should have the pull down menu, and that pops you between the different shooting modes. So once you've turned on those tech previews, it should enable those long exposure and depth capture at the bottom. And I'll go over those in just a second. But to start, we have automatic mode. And for those of you who capture on your phones, I'm pretty sure all different camera devices have this, but it's a way to adjust your exposure compensation. So you can do that natively on your camera, but within Lightroom CC, what that looks like is swiping left and right to adjust your exposure. So as I swipe right, it's going to get brighter. As I swipe left, it's going to get darker. So it's exposure compensation built into the camera, which is really, really useful. I encourage you guys to play with that in general, on no matter what camera, what app you're capturing with. What you can do, I'm going to put it back at 0. On the top right, there are 3 dots. And when you pull down those dots, it gives you different menus. I want to show you the one that looks like a pyramid, the triangle. When you tap on that, it'll show you your highlight clipping. So that's very relevant when I'm doing something like pulling my exposure really bright. Those zebra stripes are basically it telling me that I'm overexposing and that I've lost all my data there. So if you are used to capturing on a DSLR, the highlight clipping, your little blinking highlights, that's exactly what that is, but mimicked on the Lightroom CC camera, which is really cool. I'm going to turn that off for now because it gets a little distracting. And I want to walk you through the other things really quickly. There's so much in here that we could spend a whole day talking about Lightroom, but I want to give you kind of like the lay of the land to make you guys feel confident using it on your own. So in that same row of icons on the top, you can change your aspect ratio. You can set your timer, change your grid lines, add a level if you'd like, and it's a horizontal as well as a vertical level, which is really cool. Highlight clippings like I showed you, and then your different settings if you want to adjust any of those. On the bottom, on the right side of the shutter button, if you have 2 lenses, it'll give you this option to toggle between the T and the W for telephoto and wide. You'll be able to lock your exposure, so if you've done something like, sorry, I'll turn those back on. So if you've done something like make it really dark, you can lock it, and then no matter where you point it, it's not going to readjust until you unlock it or you tap it somewhere else. Okay, and then the bottom right is basically your shooting presets. That's kind of like applying a filter as you're taking the photo. I don't really recommend that. I like to just take it normal and then add the presets to it later. So I usually leave that off. All right, then to go from there, on the left side, we have that pull-down menu. If you go into professional mode, what it does is that it unlocks more tools for you. So it shows you your exposure, where your exposure is falling. You can change your shutter speed if you want to capture in a different shutter speed. ISO, if you know what that means. So for those of you who know what all these things mean, by all means, go in there, play with it if you want. I find that just by using exposure compensation, even in automatic mode, I can get essentially everything that I need. The one thing that I find myself popping into professional mode for is the autofocus. So I skipped white balance, but white balance is balancing out the color temperatures like I mentioned earlier in that mixed lighting photo. So you can see the different lighting scenarios by icon. But if you go to auto, which is next with the little plus, what you can do is adjust your focus. It's manual focus, pretty fine focus as well. So as I slide that dot along the slider, what you'll see is that things, when they become in focus, they become highlighted in green, which is actually really handy. So if I'm trying to nail focus on something really close to me, There's a lot in focus in this one, but that's not always the case. This is extremely useful for things where it's very difficult to discern the foreground from the background. iPhones or smartphones have trouble in those situations a lot. So situations, these are the examples I always give because they have come up multiple times. Raindrops on windows, when you're trying to shoot those cool shots, the phone doesn't know that it should be focusing on the water droplets in the front and not the stuff that's behind it, so it gets really confused. So using this fine focus and pulling it manually to the water droplets is how you nail those shots. The other scenario that I like to give is when you're shooting spider webs. This beautiful, incredible spider web with a little spider on it. The iPhone has a really hard time focusing on that. Any smartphone has a really hard time focusing on that automatically. So using the manual focus will help you get that perfectly sharp as well. Okay, when you go further, you have high dynamic range. So that's really just capturing details in the highlights and the shadows at the same time. Below that, you have your long exposure. So you can really adjust your, so I don't want to keep swinging it around because that's annoying for you guys to watch. You can adjust how long your exposure is from half a second all the way to 5 seconds, and it's telling you along the top what that duration is. I do have to say that there is third icon from the left, the little hand, looks like waving. So if you turn it on, it should account for a certain amount of handshake, because the longer the exposure is, the more handshake you have in the interim just naturally. So if you aren't shooting for too long, that handshake compensation will probably work just fine. It'll be great. But if you're shooting for much longer than a second or two, much longer than a second, you might want to, I would recommend shooting on a tripod. And if you're interested in like a little iPhone tripod, there's one called the Joby, it's a Joby Grip Tight Micro Stand. If you have questions, you can come talk to me about it after. But I do recommend a tripod for capturing longer exposures. And the other thing I wanted to say is, if you go further down to the depth capture, oh, I remember what I want to say. Before I forget, long exposure and depth capture, the reason they are tech previews is because they're features that are still being built and refined. So there might be little hiccups or glitches along the way, or it might not do all you want it to do or all you know that it should be doing. And that's because it's not a fully released feature yet. So bear that in mind when you're using those features. Okay, so the depth capture is relying on the two lenses to take depth readings of your images. So I'll show you, I'm gonna leave this actually because it doesn't look any different when you're capturing it. I do have to point out that along the top center, you'll see that it's an HEIC image because I'm capturing on the iPhone. So that's the iPhone format that captures that depth information. So I'm gonna pop over here. I'm gonna show you a photo I captured yesterday using the depth capture mode here at Adobe Max. So the reason why an image like this is useful, for those of you who are familiar, and I'll show it later as well, you can make selective edits within Lightroom. So that means that you can select a specific part of your image and make it brighter or darker or change the color or whatever. You're making a targeted adjustment on one piece of your image. But what you can do instead with that depth image is actually select what you want to adjust based on the depth reading. So if you go to, I open the image, I'm in the edit module now. On the bottom left, you see the selective icon. Once you tap on that, you tap on the plus at the top, and you're given 4 icons across the top. The far right icon is your depth map, or your depth masking. And what is highlighted in red is what it is affecting. So that's what you have selected. So you can basically, on the bottom, kind of scrub your finger along and pull it so that you're selecting different parts of your image based on the depth, which is pretty cool. You can actually like fine tune it as well and kind of slide the little sliders to affect more of it if you want. So once I've made that selection, I hit that check mark on the bottom, And then that enables me to make my selective edits on just that part I targeted. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to make it a little bit brighter, maybe add some contrast, and then add some saturation, and then commit the change on the bottom right with the check mark. So now when I press and hold the image, it'll toggle back and forth between the original and the edit. So here's the original and the edit. So you see that the only piece that was affected was that part that I had selected with the depth map. So that's pretty cool and can be really powerful, especially if it's like an object isolated against a background that you want to edit. All right. I'm going to pop back over to the laptop for just a second. I want to talk a little bit about editing, give you some editing tips and advice before we go into that section of the presentation. So this is a big pet peeve of mine, and it's a very, very simple way of improving your image tremendously from the get-go. We don't always pay attention to making sure our horizon is straight or the lines are straight when we're capturing stuff, but it's a really easy fix. Every single editing app has a way for you to just straighten your image ever so slightly, because usually that's all it needs. If your horizon is not straight, especially in an image where the horizon is really important, it kind of gives the impression that you were careless as a photographer. You didn't really think about it. You don't really want that to be the impression you're giving to the people viewing your images. So just straightening it helps tremendously. I encourage you to embrace filters. I know that some people maybe don't like them or they have a bad reputation, but they exist and they're also very popular for a reason. Why reinvent the wheel when there's already this incredible filter that makes your image look that much better? What I do have to say about filters, though, is that generally speaking, at 100% intensity, they're too much. Most of them are not actually made to be used at 100% intensity. 100% intensity gives you a very clear idea of what's happening, but you actually want to apply it at a much lower intensity. So even, you've probably seen it even in Instagram, those filters that they built in, now there's an intensity slider so that you can kind of make it a little bit less in your face. Just lower that intensity a little bit. In general, I recommend that people don't be too heavy-handed. And one recommendation I have for everybody is that when you make your edits on your images, I encourage you to toggle back and forth between the original version and the edited version, because that will clearly show you where you started from and how far you've come. So doing that quick toggle often is like oh my God, I pushed it too far. I got carried away with all these sliders. It looks so good, it makes it look so good, but like once you've played with a bunch of them, it's shocking how far you've come, and it's not always good. You don't always want to go that far. So I encourage you to make your edits in a way that you think looks good, toggle back and forth between the original and the edit, and then just tone it down a little bit if you feel like you need to make that adjustment. I really would love for everybody to think about editing their photos in a way that can withstand the test of time. Now, this sounds very dramatic. It doesn't really matter if your Adobe Max conference photos that go on Twitter can withstand the test of time, but I'm talking more about like the artistic images that are going in your portfolio or that you're printing and sharing with people or putting up on your wall. The thing that I always fall back on when I talk about this is, do you remember selective adjustments, selective color? So wedding photography where the bride and the groom were black and white, but their bouquet was in color. That is an edit that has not withstood the test of time. People don't do that these days. When you look at photos and you see that, you can basically date their wedding to within this like 10-year time frame when that was really popular. So I encourage you to stay away from things like that. Generally a light edit that enhances an image but doesn't change it completely is the way you want to go. Okay, I'm going to demo some editing. So I'm going to pop over to my phone again. And yesterday, I forgot to cover sharing and syncing. So if I'm like wrapping up and I haven't done that yet, can you remind me? Okay, so let's go into an edit. So, okay, let's do an edit. Here's a good photo. Once I've selected the photo that I want to edit, I'm in the editing module. It'll say edit on the top left. And if you pull down that You can go into, actually, that's like beyond what I want to talk about right now. But there's a pull-down menu there if you want to explore further. When it says edit there, you should have your editing tools down at the bottom. And I'm going to, I'm going to just swipe through them and talk about them really quickly. But I'm actually going to start with, I'm not going to start on the far left. I'm going to start with profiles, which is the fourth icon from the left at the bottom. So profiles, they're essentially like filters or presets if you're used to editing in Lightroom and you're familiar with presets. But they're not quite the same. And the reason they're not the same is because when you apply a preset to an image in Lightroom, what that preset does is basically pre-adjusts your sliders for you. So instead of being at 0, all your sliders are pushed over a little bit to get that final look. So once you apply the preset and you want to change it, you can just go in and change the sliders. That's cool. But the profiles differ in that they're essentially applying a preset. It changes the look of your image, but it's your new baseline. It is your new 0. When you apply a profile, that is your new 0. So all of your sliders are still at 0. So unlike the presets, which shift your sliders for you, the profiles are just giving you a new 0, and then you can go from there. So let me show you what those look like. There are a bunch of different versions, different profiles that you can go through. You can do black and white, and you can kind of tap through them literally the same way that you would filters and presets. Choose one you like. And I kind of like this kind of warm, darker one. So the nice thing about them also is that there is a slider right on the bottom, and it places your current edit right in the center. So you can actually increase the intensity of it or decrease the intensity of it. And you can do that with any of the artistic profiles. So I kind of like this one. I'm going to go with this one. And maybe, let me brighten I can't see what I'm doing, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to brighten my image a little bit. So I'm going to skip auto, that's fine. I kind of like to play with I like to have control, so I don't do auto that often. So I can do things like make my image brighter, make it a little bit darker. I'm going to go with a little bit brighter maybe, and maybe pull down my blacks a little. Maybe I want to do something like increase the saturation a little bit. I don't know. One of the tools that I really like that I want to point out to you is within the color menu. So I'm now 2 icons from the right on the bottom. I'm in that color menu. When you open that up, on the top right, it says Mix. And if you tap on that, you get your color mixer. But what it also includes is the Targeted Adjustment tool. And that's the icon right in the center. So if you press that, it gives you the values along the bottom, the selections along the bottom. So you can control either your hue, your saturation, or your luminance. So say I want the sky to be a different color. I have hue selected. My targeted adjustment tool is on. I'm going to tap in my blue sky. I'm going to tap anywhere I want to adjust, right? So I want to tap on the blue. And if I pull down, the hue of all the blues in the image is going to change. It'll change in one direction if I go down and another direction if I go up. I can do the same thing for saturation. So I popped over to saturation on the bottom. And if I tap on the blue, I can make the blue a lot more saturated. And luminance is the same thing. It's basically like how bright that color is showing up. So I'm going to tap on luminance. And what I'm going to do is actually make it darker. So I'm going to pull it down. This is not an edit I would generally recommend. It's a little too much. But just so you can see what's happening, I wanted to do that. When you're done with that tool, you have to tap off of it to get out and then hit done. And then again, pressing and holding on the image gives you that before and after comparison. So this is where we were, and this is where we are now. Further, there are other tools that you can play with. You can adjust your clarity and your vignetting. dehazing, all that stuff. You can do sharpening. There's so much in here that you can play with. One thing that I did want to point out is the geometry tools. They're actually quite powerful in allowing you to fix any sort of perspective distortion your image might have. This is really important if you're capturing photos of buildings or things with lines that should be straight. It's not always easy to get them all straight, but this will let you kind of play with your plane. You can fix your vertical plane or your horizontal plane or rotate. There's not too much going on in this image because I'm pretty far away from what I'm photographing, but there's an auto correct feature as well that's pretty powerful. So if you look at the World Trade Center tower on the left and the bridge tower on the right, they're kind of skewed inward ever so slightly. If I go to that pull down menu and I hit auto, it kind of just pops them straight a little bit. So before and after. So it shows you the edit as well as that perspective correction. And then you can correct chromatic aberration, lens corrections if you want to do that. A lot of those profiles are built in. So if you're shooting on a camera, Lightroom can recognize, reads the metadata, and then applies the correct filter to correct that distortion if it needs to. Here's where your presets are. There are a lot more. And you can actually sync presets from Lightroom Classic if you're a Classic user and want to bring some presets over. Oops. And then you can always undo. This is apply all from another photo or undo in the next one. So I can reset to import. The other things I want to show you, I'm scrolling over to the far left again to show you those tools. So just left of profiles is the crop, and it's a pretty straightforward crop tool and straightening tool if you want to do that. You can do healing. Let me pop into an image that might need some healing. Actually, let's do this one. Say I don't want that bird in there. I can go into healing, and along the left, I can adjust my brush size, my feathering, and the, wait, what is that? Oh yeah, sorry, the opacity. And the way that it works is a little tricky to get used to. So basically, if I tap on the top circle, that's my brush size. I'm tapping, and then if I drag down, the brush size gets smaller, and if I drag up, the brush size gets bigger. All right, so that's how you use all three of those tools. Just tap on them and drag up and down. So I'm just going to paint the bird. And for those of you familiar with cloning and healing in Lightroom, it basically pulls a source and then pops it over the destination where you have just painted. So you can basically get rid of your bird. So before, after. So that's extremely useful for things like blemish correction, or if you've taken a photo and there's like a piece of trash on the ground that you didn't see, you can get rid of that stuff pretty easily. The far left one is the selective adjust tool. This is an image that I took that was not using the depth mapping. So do you remember earlier when I popped into the selective adjust tool and I hit the plus, there were 4 icons? Now I only have 3. These are the original 3 that are not part of the tech preview, so everybody has these. So you can do either an adjustment brush, so you can paint on the area that you want to adjust, or you can do a radial gradient, which is a center icon, or you can do a linear gradient. So I'm going to pop into the linear gradient and say, I want to make the sky darker. I can just pull that gradient down. And again, everything that's pink is what I'm affecting. So I'm selecting that area, going to light, and then pulling down my exposure because I know I want to make the sky darker. So before, after. The sky is darker, and I've gotten rid of that bird. Say that I'm really happy with this and I want to share it on Instagram. What I can do is actually hit the icon on the top right. Third from the right, it looks like a little arrow out. And I can either save it to my camera roll directly or share directly to Instagram. So I hit share. It'll ask me what image size. I can hit small, that's good enough. And then I can basically navigate straight to Instagram. And I think it opens the last account that I had open on Instagram. So I'm going to share it. Say I'm going to share it on my feed. I can hit that button to show the full rectangle. Hit next. I can still do the Instagram filters if I want. So I'm basically making a normal Instagram post. And then I can switch to, I guess it does allow you, sorry, it does allow you to switch, oh my gosh. I tried to turn off my notifications, but I forgot about Fitbit. So you can switch to another account if you have a business account and you want to share in your business account, for example. All right, let me pop back out of that. So the last thing I want to show you is syncing across devices. I didn't forget, guys. I'm doing good. Okay. So I'm going to go to Profiles just to make it really obvious. I'm going to make it a black and white image. And okay. I'm going to make it a black and white image. And then I'm going to pop back in. So it's in this AB to edit album. And I'm going to pop back over to my laptop. Oh my gosh, I keep doing that. So do you see that image? Okay, let me see. I have to, oh my gosh. How do I refresh on this? Wait, I can click and then hit like, did it show up as black and white? Yay. Okay, sorry, I can't really see from where I am. Okay, so that is really it. So the reason I wanted to show that is so that you can see how easy it is to make your edits on your phone and have it reflected on the web, and then likewise on your iPad and your computer if you're using Lightroom CC on your machine. Okay, so that's essentially it. What I'm going to do is come back here. I have a few last words. I am going to take questions if you have questions right at the end. We have some time maybe, and then we'll have to clear the room pretty quickly. But if you have questions that we need to take outside, we can do that right outside. The last things I want to say are, of course, as you've been hearing all along, please complete the Max Session survey if you would be so kind. And then Adobe has asked us to share about this. They are partnering with Ripple Effect Images, which is a nonprofit that was started by Annie Griffiths, who is a wonderful Nat Geo photographer, incredibly inspirational. She was our keynote speaker last year for those of you who are here. She's wonderful. So Adobe has partnered with Ripple Effects to really help people share stories that matter. Ripple Effects, what they do is essentially support women in third world countries by they understand that supporting women, bettering the women in a community really strengthens the community in general. So they're a wonderful organization to support, and we're really asking you to share your photos and your experiences, if you so choose, that are relevant, using the hashtag photography for good. All right. I'll let you guys take photos, and thank you.